against what goal? I had a nice visit with the three coordinators from 9 wonderfully pleasant people. What are the goals? What's the outcome? How will you know this has been a good investment, that this template works? And I must tell you, I'm a little concerned about a mile wide and this thin. But that's okay. I mean, you have a plan here. But what we could come to understand, it'll be important in strategic planning and goal setting. How will you know it works? What's your outcome? Do you have clear metrics? We're going to move here. Has that been defined?
Well, certainly we want to see the number of priority schools and focus schools decline.
By how much?
Well, it would just depend within each region, but all turnaround efforts we know take some time, and we're just getting started. Ideally, we should be seeing them decline by, at least 10 to 20% year one. We would hope. So it's just a matter of giving them the right support.
I would really encourage you to set a clear picture of what will get accomplished here, and the best your ability to put some numbers to it. And what we have found, and some of the good news we shared today, we have found that as a board, I think any board would tell you, good governance would tell you this, set clear goals and then align your resources to achieve them, and it helps everybody involved in the field and our folks. Because I sense, because then you can make adjustments too, say we're on track, we're off. You do not snap your fingers. That's why this board's been so adamant about the turnaround schools and lead partners, that we keep at least as much support as we gave them last year. We don't want to, we know this takes time and a lot of intense, hard work by a lot of great educators, mostly on the ground. I think all we can do and visit is coach. But I see a need for goals here, and very clear, and I think it'll help everybody. I say it as a positive
Sure.
deal, and we'd be glad to participate in that.
Well, and I mean, I would enjoy, you talk about the baseline and the baseline
Correct.
numbers, and as soon as
Yes.
you get that evaluation set, I would enjoy, a presentation from you again, seeing what your baseline numbers are, and then hearing what the goals are in terms of those baseline numbers, and then the follow-up meeting at the end of the result of all of
Sure.
that.
And that's what I said, we're working with the university. We've
Right.
already had a conversation about having that baseline data, and so we're just beginning to develop that at this
But
point.
don't you have the data?
Not to evaluate necessarily this program. So we're talking about program evaluation.
No, I'm talking about what do we expect out in the field? Not how well the program runs as you understand and conceive it, but what are the outcomes?
Well, and
We don't need a university to evaluate that part. We need, because we know where we're at, where do we want to be, how do we want to define it?
well, certainly we want to see schools move off of that priority list, and we want to see improved student achievement, just
How
like you
many,
do.
how fast, how many you want to prevent from getting on it? I think some of the concern I've heard here, the idea is to take all schools up and make sure, Cs don't drop into Ds and
Absolutely.
Fs. So I'd like some metrics. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
No.
How did you pick the people who are your outreach folks?
Well, as we were assembling our team, actually we had quite a few different criteria. The first thing is we wanted credibility in the field, so people with a very strong background in education. I think all of them have administrator licenses. They have been teachers, they've been coaches, professional development leaders, and they come highly recommended. So credibility in academics is number one. Number two, interpersonal skills, because these are people who are going to be having conversations, courageous conversations with educators every day. And so we want people that can do that have the ability to talk to people and help facilitate conversations. So that was our second. And of course, obviously, we wanted people that lived in the region, that knew the region, that had some connections within the regions.
The causes of schools getting in trouble academically are huge and widely varied. Sometimes it's poor leadership, sometimes it's deficient instructional strategies, many factors. And then the expertise required to flip those factors around to positives is not something you run across every day. Indeed, a great administrator might have no experience in turning around terrible administrators and coaching them and so forth. How do you see it the folks you've recruited matching up with the technical skills and all the different issues they're going to have to deal with across 353 schools?
Well, we intentionally hired different skill sets. So we have some that are good in secondary, some that were educational leaders in elementary, in different content areas, special education. We have one that's a technology guru. In fact, she helped Evansville at Glenwood set up an internal structure for their priority school. So we have a very strong team with a lot of different skill sets so that when they come together, that we're a very solid team and we can learn from one another and share our expertise.
I do want to reiterate that we actually are going from, we're providing more support and more visits with the outreach approach than we did with the approach where you just came from the Department of Education of Indianapolis and then you went out to see schools. So we are embarking on a different approach to having services, actually working within a different system of making that work. The cool thing about it is that when the outreach coordinators call any division at the Department of Education, there is immediate collaboration between the divisions. They're not working in their silos anymore. They're actually having a laser focus on getting something answered for a particular school in a particular region. We do have 4 support people. There are 5 other people at the department actually that are also helping with this. So we actually have a group of 20 people. And those who are still working at the division are the people who actually facilitate things for whatever's needed in the regional areas. So gathering of the best practices can happen on a more precise level, I guess, and serve as the conduit to ensure that happens. And then with the facilitation of the school improvement that we'll have electronically, we'll be able to instantly know what we're working with and who we're working with in terms of the school and the supports that they need. So it's a huge undertaking. We're committed to actually providing support for schools, and it is our goal. I heard you, Dan, about wanting some more specifics. We just got organized, so we are working on not only our own program evaluation, but also gathering all the information that we need on all of the schools, not just the priority and focus schools. The focus and priority schools have been highlighted here for you today because those are requirements of the federal government, that we have monitoring oversight. And not only do we want to have monitoring oversight, we want it to be good monitoring oversight that actually is going to bring about school improvement. So we have intensified the actual outcome of actually having monitoring oversight. Sarah?
I was just curious as to the timeline and procedures for board notification as schools are heading towards year 6 status. Just wanting to make sure that that's clearly defined in terms of the point at which they come, in terms of public hearings and things like that are required as we head in. I just didn't know if there had been any new thought process as to how that will work.
I think in the past that happened in the spring. Obviously, since we were just getting formed in the spring, that didn't happen on that timeline this year, but certainly in the future we would work with the superintendent and our legal staff to ensure that in the spring we're able to bring forward any concerns we might have in that area.
Do we have, and not only that, when you see the template, and we talk about the template pieces here later, what was not in place was a good way to do summative evaluation pieces based upon the monthly reports, and I think we were all frustrated by that and the differential pieces that we were getting. It's the first time that the board has ever done lead partners or turnaround academies like we've done in terms of making sure we have a process for getting good information and monitoring oversight. So that was definitely in mind as we were putting all of this together to make sure that that's coherent and succinct and going to bring about the results and the information that we need to make decisions.
Do we have an updated listing of where we're at in the schools gathering higher quantity of years as failing status?
Oh, sure we do. Oh, sure we do. Yes. You're talking about, yes, we're going to get you those lists. Including in that list, Sarah, we can also put the number of years that they might have been listed as a failing school. Mm-hmm. Sure, we certainly can. Oh, sure. Yeah, Tony?
I just want to commend you all for having an outstanding Region 6 team with
They are
Linda
outstanding.
Randolph
Yes,
and
they are.
Dan Bunridge. I've known Linda Randolph for decades. She's going to be fantastic.
Yes.
Part of my discussion with them, however, was about the importance of what I believe is their interaction also with these local school boards. A lot of what needs to be done can't be done without the support and in some cases, just the education of the school board members as to where they are, how soon they need to get out of there, and what needs to take place. There seemed to be a little hesitance among the Region 6 team to go to school board meetings thinking they need to deal directly with superintendents. But that's not gonna, I mean, that's imperative. It's really not gonna work unless we let these local school boards know that the state DOE has a presence and we're monitoring what they're doing as well.
Thank you, Tony. And I would tell you that one of the first things that we also did is we reached out to the state organizations, the State School Board Association, Frank Bush. We met with him and shared outreach so that he could, again, inform his members so they knew we were out there. We also talked to the Superintendent's Association and the Principals Association for the same reason. We want to make sure everybody at the state level can talk to their own membership so that they realize that we're a resource for them as well. And they're not surprised when we show up at member meetings.
So you're going to have them go to some school board
Oh,
meetings?
yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think they've already been in Region 6 though. I think Linda's already been to a few.
Yeah, she goes to a lot of
Yeah, yes, she does.
Thank you. In the essence of time, I think we'll go ahead and move on to the agenda, and I would like to ask the board their pleasure here at this point. It is 10:45. We are going to have the lead partners give their presentations, and then we have action and consent. Do you want to take a very quick restroom break now, or are you okay with just proceeding? Andrea says yes. We could take just really a 5-minute, a very, very brief recess, and then lead partners will be in place and we can get that ready to go. First up will be IPS and then TNTP, followed by Scholastic and Voyager and Amplify. Then we'll have the lead partner contract updates and the template presentations, and then we'll have action. We'll take a 5-minute recess, 5 minutes. right, we're ready for the first presentation, IPS. These will be presentations by each of the lead partners.
Yes, I did. Sorry. Be in the way there.
Thank you, Peggy. Superintendent, Interim Superintendent of IPS.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the State Board of Education, Superintendent Ritz, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm Peggy Hinckley. I'm serving as the interim superintendent of the Indianapolis Public Schools. I want to thank you for the support for IPS in the past from this body and the Department of Ed, and appreciate your assistance extended to us this year. Before I begin, I would like to say that in the material we are sharing today, in this presentation of the data that you have, and I'm not going to reference each data point, but speak to it generally, as well as discussion that I'll bring up later about Washington, IPS is prepared to step forward, prioritize its resources, and contribute to its solutions with no excuses. The notion that it's up to someone else to help us is not the correct path. While we appreciate all of the support we have received, IPS accepts responsibility for addressing and accepts the accountability for the academic needs of our schools. It's important to note as we look at this, I just hope no one. I hope not. I was afraid the room was just right out the door there. I appreciate it. It's important to note that all three schools, Marshall, Washington, and Broad Ripple, had new principals last year. In the case of Washington, the new principal went on FMLA mid-year and resigned in June. Linda Gaggy was placed in the role of principal in March when I assumed responsibilities at IPS. So those leadership changes require a refocus for the staff at each high school, and I don't offer those as excuses, just as the facts. What I would say is we've had great success with three of those lead partners. As we look at John Marshall and Voyager, we've had a very positive experience, but I would point out that John Marshall, prior to Principal Chad Gray, had gone through tumultuous leadership with some very public acrimony about that for about 5 years. And so it was at very low measures. And for all of you who have familiarity with urban high schools, when those benchmarks are so low, getting order in the building and raising it to an acceptable standard takes a lot of work. Voyager had provided that necessary structure, because when you are drowning, you have to have structures in place for everything, from discipline to the academic program to how we're going to deal with the accountability metrics. And so that partnership has gone very well. They are back again. We are grateful for the support that the IDOE and the State Board have provided. But I would say to you, whether you provided that or not, it was our intention to go forward with our own resources. As we look at Broad Ripple, with its work with Scholastic and with TNTP, we were so pleased with that work that we have, as a district, added to Scholastic with providing support for the RISE, so that when teachers have been identified in an improvement necessary or in category 1, that we have resources through Scholastic for teachers to go online and get professional development related to their weak areas. With the new teacher project, we were very unhappy with the level of our knowledge on the RISE document and our ability to accurately address some of our academic issues. And so this summer, again, through our resources, we contracted with the new teacher project to conduct 2 days of intensive training with our administrators to improve their ability to do that. I'll speak to George Washington separately under the lead partner issue. But I just want to say for all those schools, as we look at English 10 results, Broad Ripple for their 13 data was at 71% in English 10, 67% Algebra 1. These are first-time takers, not cohorts. With Washington, we saw a decline from 48 to 39 in the English language arts, and I would tell you, my concern is we think the calculation of the grade will go from a C to a D. And I consider that to be a red flag that we've got to do some additional things, which I will share with you later. We are at 59% in Algebra 1 first testers, John Marshall at 34%, and in both English language arts and Algebra 1. And this is certainly remains a school priority, would be an understatement. It is why the Voyager partnership is essential. And in fact, as they are meeting with their quarterly results, we have a meeting tomorrow to further reinforce some things that need to be done there. So I would say to you that we are making improvement. We have been happy with those lead partners, but I would be less than sincere not to say that our work is far from over. We must take a focused and intentional those actions that will cause these schools and the staff to improve those accountability metrics. There are no other choices for us in IPS. And I'm here to say that we remain committed to do that on behalf of the school district. May I answer any questions?
Yeah, did you have any data that you needed to present?
Well, I thought there was something that was given to you.
The state board has the data.
Oh, okay, okay.
Okay, I apologize.
Sure. If you have any kind of information that you might need, or questions. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. TNTP?
Morning.
Good morning.
My name is Ian Scott. I'm a partner with TNTP, formerly the New Teacher Project, and we very much appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about some of the great work that we've seen over the past year at Broad Ripple and George Washington, and the great partnership we've had with IPS. Dr. Scott Syverson is our Director of Talent Management. He leads the work at both Broad Ripple and George Washington, and also helps us pass out papers on occasion. So he's just handing you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, but please feel free to stop me throughout the process if you have questions, and then certainly happy to answer any questions you have at the end. So just to kind of take a step back to when we started in January 2012, TNTP, during that first semester working in George Washington and Broad Ripple, really kind of set 5 objectives, all of which were met around kind of 3 main priorities. One was just helping the leadership team at both schools, basically anybody who supported or evaluated teachers, getting on the same page with what the district's evaluation tool, which was different at the time, actually said, that they were consistently rating teachers, that they were actually identifying teachers to support and prioritizing them the right way, and had development plans in place, and that throughout that process we were also assessing their individual needs as coaches and evaluators of teachers, and also just the instructional culture of the school, which we measure through things like teacher feedback, and we'll talk about some of the results there in a second. From that first few months that we were in the school, we had a couple of big takeaways. So one is that when we first started working with the administrators, fewer than a quarter of the principals and assistant principals at either school said that they were confident in their team's ability to see a specific classroom lesson and come away with the same rating, which we continue to focus on in the next year through norming sessions and trainings. Very few teachers were receiving a rating other than a rating in the top 2 categories of the district's last system, which when we looked at the school's achievement results did not really align with student outcomes. And so we wanted to, again, look at that as a measure of whether or not ratings were accurate. And when we asked teachers about just the amount of observations and feedback we received, a large number were just said that they wanted more feedback, that they didn't receive enough. And so we wanted to work with both schools to make sure that that was happening. And so from that needs assessment, we really came away with 4 main priorities that we focused on during this past school year. So one was supporting the schools and by extension the district with the implementation of the district's new evaluation system, which was a modified version of the RISE tool. The second priority was spending a lot of time on site, both with teams and individuals, and ensuring that they were recording accurate evaluation data and that they were coming up with concrete, actionable next steps for teachers, which from our work in other cities is something we've seen a lot of administrators and evaluators struggle with. The third priority was just monitoring progress, making sure that the schools were meeting the deadlines and that they were getting into classrooms as much as they needed to, which the new system required more. That things like student learning objectives were being completed on time and written effectively, and that teacher development plans were more effective than they had been in the past. And then the last was just continuing to assess the school-wide instructional culture and working with both teams to set some priorities for the school year on ways that we could improve. So for the first priority, we really met this through conducting a series of initial trainings and designing some supplementary tools for both schools to help them with the transition to the new system. So a lot of it was really helping them unpack the indicators, think through what effective instruction looked like in each of those competencies. We designed a crosswalk between the outgoing Danielson framework that IPS had been using and the new framework to help them see the connections between the two and assist them with mapping evidence. And then we also supported the school teams in thinking about how to message these new expectations and message the new protocols to their teachers so that teachers would have a more consistent understanding. And we did that through some initial presentations to teachers, and then we also worked with school leaders to design supplemental resources, building templates that they could use in things like monthly newsletters, just so that teachers were starting to use the language of the new tool and understand exactly what it was, what was expected of them, and what effective instruction looked like. At Broad Ripple, we actually took this a step further and did a little bit beyond our scope, which I think is a testament just to their commitment of it. And we actually ran after-school optional sessions for teachers where they would come in and really work with the Broad Ripple leadership team and Dr. Syverson in really, again, unpacking those indicators in each competency, really understanding what is the difference between a minimally effective level of performance and an effective level of performance in each competency, doing things with them like actually taking them through norming exercises themselves so that they understood those differences, and then answering questions about student learning objectives and writing those. And what we saw through that process was and I would say it's certainly an ongoing process, but definitely a shift in the way that teachers perceive the evaluation process, which I think is in most schools nationally it's perceived as just something that you have to do. It's perceived as something punitive. It's not seen as something that is in place to actually help you improve your instruction, and we definitely started to see some progress with that at Broad Ripple. The other focus here was really training the school-based team to lead these sessions themselves, and we made some great progress with that and really started to build their capacity to sustain these supports after TNTP's work ultimately ends at the school. So the second priority was, again, really around ensuring accurate evaluations and that next steps were clear. And we set some goals for all the administrators we worked with that we would see 100% of them master some foundational skills that really allow someone to consistently be normed. Things like citing low inference evidence in an observation, things like mapping that evidence to the appropriate indicator, and then again, setting next steps that are actually clear and measurable, which we see a lot struggle with. And we did see 100% meet expectations for citing low inference evidence. They by the end of the year were mapping that evidence so they were appropriate competency, and pretty much all but one were consistently normed on Domain 2 of the RISE framework by the end of the year. And we did that through monthly team norming sessions where Scott would design and run trainings with the team co-observations, and then obviously a lot of time with individual administrators going into classrooms, debriefing the observation, mapping the evidence, and spending a lot of time preparing for feedback conversations so that those conversations were effective for teachers. One of the ways that we measured our progress and a goal that we had set was just around kind of the administrator's self-evaluation of whether or not their skills had improved in this area. And we were pleased to see that 100% at both schools felt that, one, that the practice was helping them become better at assessing instruction, and two, that it was helping them not only evaluate instruction, but provide feedback to teachers. It's something that we, again, continue to work on, but it definitely, across the board, both schools felt like the training was really effective. The third priority was, again, just around monitoring progress, and so working with schools to set calendars, making sure they were getting into classrooms, looking at teacher development plans. We designed a teacher development plan template that was kind of more effective than what they had in place to make sure that, again, there was a clear roadmap to what was expected for that teacher, and that there was a clear outcome for that teacher. And we also continued just to monitor, were we seeing a better alignment between evaluation ratings and how students were actually performing. And again, this is something that schools and districts struggle with nationally. When we look at large urban districts, we don't see anybody doing this exceptionally well yet as they roll out new systems. And we did see significant progress at both schools, and just in the number of the distribution of ratings and the better alignment between what's actually going on when it comes to student outcomes. So our fourth priority was, again, measuring instructional culture, which our primary mechanism for doing this is a tool that TNTP has developed known as Insight, which is a survey of teachers that we give each year, and it asks teachers 10 different domains of school culture, everything from observation and feedback, evaluation, the learning environment. We ask about their experience with strategies that our research has shown are effective for retaining high-performing teachers. And we saw some great gains with that. Specifically, when we look at Broad Ripple, we set a couple of priorities around having teachers feel that the expectations for effective instruction and knowing how they were being evaluated was going to improve. And we saw pretty marked results in a pretty short amount of time at Broad Ripple. Specifically, when we asked teachers whether or not they agreed that the expectations for effective teaching were clearly defined, we saw an 18-point jump from the year prior, which, again, still a lot of room to grow, but I think it's definitely reflecting that we're seeing progress in the area we wanted. 14-point jump in the number who are reporting that they understand the criteria that are used to evaluate performance, which really align to what the leadership team had focused on during that semester. The other one I'd point out is just that the feedback I get from being observed actually helps me improve student outcomes. We saw improvement, but I would say that is an area where, relative to top performing schools nationally, there's still work to be done, and that is consistent with other work that we do across the country, where that's something that takes a little bit more than a year to really get that to a good place. When we look at Washington, similar progress in terms of understanding the criteria. Actually saw a little bit of a step back in terms of expectations for effective teaching, and I think that is partly attributed to just the turnover that happened mid-year at the school and had happened from the previous year. That team was a little bit behind where Broad Ripple is, just in terms of being on the same page with expectations, and again, getting teachers to feel that feedback is something that helps them improve student outcomes is an area where we still have a lot of work to do, I would say, at George Washington. So based on that progress and thinking about what we want to accomplish at Broad Ripple this year, so TNTP was asked to submit a proposal, which we did, to provide one more year of support at Broad Ripple. And so when we think about what we want to accomplish in this final year, it's really built around two main levers. So one is further developing the team's ability to accurately rate performance and building their long-term capacity to do so. So continuing a lot of the norming trainings, but also making sure that we're building and leaving structures in place so that if this is TNTP's last year of support in Broad Ripple, that team can continue that work past the duration of this contract, that we're building resources that they could continue to use in years past, and that we're actually working with members of the school leadership team to train them up as co-facilitators so they could run similar things. And then the second is really continuing the work of getting the evaluation process to be seen as a mechanism that is helping teachers get better through targeted feedback, not just as something punitive. So continue to provide resources to help teachers have that common understanding, working with school leaders to ensure that student learning objectives are effective, and co-planning and co-designing more of those supplemental opportunities to get teachers to engage in discussions around the differences between performance levels and the different competencies so that there really is a clear, uniform understanding of what's expected in each competency. And so when we get into the goal-setting process with Broad Ripple this year, our intent is to work with IPS and the Broad Ripple leadership team to set some more measurable targets, specifically around these priority areas, aligning teacher ratings to student outcomes, continuing to see that evaluators are normed, and continue to see that school instructional culture, especially as it relates to feedback, continues to improve. And finally, we want to see an increase in the usage of research-based best practices that TNTP has found are very effective for retaining top-performing teachers. And so with that, I'm happy to pause and answer any questions that you have. Yes, ma'am.
I wish we could put you in every school in the state. Are you finding that after 2 years or 3 years with a school, that you can walk away and the administrators have the capacity to continue the program uninterrupted and don't sort of backpedal into the old ways?
Yeah, so something we see pretty consistently is that in year one, we can pretty quickly get to a point where the team is normed, and our goal is to leave systems in place where they can continue that work on their own. It is and takes a little bit more than a year to get evaluators to a place where they're not only giving clear and actionable feedback, but they're identifying the right levers that are going to help a teacher move from a level 2 to a level 3. That's something we see administrators struggle with everywhere, and that's taken about 2 years, and then this third piece, which is really changing the culture of how evaluation is perceived, is a monumental challenge, and we're excited by the initial progress we made, but really giving them the systems in place is what we're hoping to accomplish in year 3. So I would say that we have seen that something that can be a challenge, which is just a reality of this work, is turnover. We've worked with several different principals, as Dr. Hinckley mentioned, at George Washington, which has made it a little bit more difficult. But definitely in the cases where we worked with evaluators for more than 1 year, we saw really marked and sustained improvement. And so we're pretty confident that with this team, again, we can sustain and improve upon that again.
A question really pulls off of Dave Shane's comment earlier. Briefly, how long has TNTP, who we've worked with in the New Teacher Project, been to develop expertise in developing teachers? And how much time did you spend, how many people, and how much time, for instance, did you spend in Broad Ripple? Can you give me some idea of the investment that's been made in your organization to develop this expertise and template, and how much time did you spend, let's just take Broad Ripple?
Just as an organization, so TNTP has been around since 1997, and a lot of the best practices that we've learned along the way has come from our own experience of developing new teachers, which we've been doing in Indianapolis for the past 7 years, along with our great university partner here. Specifically in terms of working with principals and evaluators, it's work we've been doing for the past 4 years with several urban districts across the country, including New York City and Los Angeles, Houston, others on the East Coast. And everything we've learned has really come from doing the work and from our research. So things like our Insight tool is something that we've been working on. We've validated with American Institute of Research and see that gains in that tool correlate to measurable gains in student outcomes and correlate to better retention rates for highly effective teachers, and that's something we've built out over the past couple of years. A lot of the other best practices are shared from our work on other sites, and again, they've been built up and refined over the past couple of years. They pull from best practices
A lot of years
in the field. A lot of years in the field. Specifically at Broad Ripple, we're there at least a full day every week, oftentimes more, spending quite a bit of time working with individual administrators through the co-observation, sitting sometimes for 45 minutes to an hour, really debriefing that observation, mapping the feedback, and getting next steps right.
Moving the needle even as much as you had is not a one-time visit or
Correct.
It's pretty intense.
Correct.
And so you've thrown a lot of resources at this.
Correct.
Thank you. I think that's instructive.
David?
May I just ask a couple of clarifying questions? You're not going to be at George Washington this year?
Correct.
Do you understand that to be your decision, a decision that was made by virtue of the expiration of the contract, or
We
somebody else's?
were just asked to submit a proposal for a set amount for Broad Ripple. So our understanding is that there wasn't funding available to continue the work at George Washington.
Where was that?
So we designed a proposal, which I think we also concluded for Broad Ripple, just because that's what we were told. There were resources available for Broad Ripple, but not for
I'm going to ask you to just submit for Broad Ripple, not for George Washington.
Correct.
Okay. Second question is, are your resources financially the same at Broad Ripple as they were last year?
They'll be slightly less. So TNTP's contract amount for last year for the two schools was, I think, around $350,000, and a lot of that is just the on-site support. So I think this year it's for 100,000, which we feel like we can do a significant scope of work in one school for that amount. IPS has also invested resources of their own in us doing monthly development sessions, which schools will have access to, and some other things. But it will be a little bit less time on site than we had done in years prior.
You understand, for our purposes, Broad Ripple's the focus, not all of IPS.
Broad Ripple
I'm
is
glad
the
to hear
focus
you're
of our
working
lead partner.
with IPS.
Correct, correct.
For our purpose. So you're going to have less money to do less work at Broad Ripple this year?
Correct.
What's the date, when were you asked to submit? I just want to make sure I understand this.
In the past 2 weeks, I think we submitted our final proposal early last week.
And you weren't even asked to submit one for George Washington?
That's correct.
Do you view the forward year, the year to come, as one where you will have as intensive an engagement with Broad Ripple as you had over the last 2 years?
No, it will be still a significant amount of time on site, but it will not be quite as much time on site, just due to the reduction of funding, and because of that, we'll shift how we spend our time and stretch it as far as we can, but it will be less than the year before.
We said we were going to do these at least as much. Isn't that the resolution?
Yes, and I think we gave you all the information about the scope of work. We gave you a side-by-side comparison, and we also, in fact, it's coming up here later on in the agenda to talk about the lead contract updates, as well as taking into consideration the change in goals, of which progress has been made, and so you change your goals and your priorities, as he's already stated, for Broad Ripple. So we have those coming up that I think we sent all of that information to you.
I just want to make sure I'm clear, because when we get to that, that's going to come back up. The intervention levels right now at their current funding, is it possible to sustain those intervention levels at the same level without the same amount of funding? Yes or no? I think that's what I want to hear.
No.
Okay.
So it will not be as much time on site, and we'll adjust accordingly to stretch it as far as we can, but it will not be the same level.
Have you had similar experiences to this where your time's been reduced?
Yes.
In that case?
Yes, and we've approached it in much the same way, with taking what we do have, and being really thoughtful about, if it's less and it's our last year, what can we accomplish, how can we go deep, and what can we really build over the course of that time, so that we're leaving something beyond the duration of it. And yeah, it's a similar challenge that we faced elsewhere.
May I ask a question? I thought at the last meeting, the reason for Washington sort of being removed from the intervention was because it had a C grade, but I thought we just heard from IPS that it's now a D, or it was moving to a D. Can someone clarify?
There were several recommendation was made by the Department of Education to not continue a contract with George Washington. Number one, because they were out of the F category, which will affect federal funding. And then there was an issue with the contract, actually the vendor providing the contract to begin with. At the end of the last meeting, there was discretion given and flexibility given to the department to do MOUs or contract or whatever with renewing for the 3 vendors that you wanted to approve, which was TNTP, Scholastic, and Voyager. And the department set about to do that with the funding resources that were available. With regard,
Washington dropped from a C to a D.
correct, and as we've sent information to you already, funding for George Washington from the federal level, there are no funds available at all. Once we started working with the vendor contract renewals, it was discovered that there are no dollars. George Washington does not qualify with a C nor a D to have any federal funding. I think we sent information to you that they've had over $6 million worth of funding that had previously already been given, and the federal funding options have literally run out. So there is no need, there was no funding to continue the contracts. I also sent you information regarding the Department of Education taking on that lead partner. And we have sent to you also a full workup providing the scope of work that was provided to make that happen. So, and we can have that discussion here in just a little bit.
I was just wanted to
Correct.
confirm that their
Correct.
scores actually dropped since we.
Was there a contracting problem or no contract requested?
The only request we received was to submit a proposal for.
What was the contracting problem? Why they're up here?
Huh?
Excuse me, I thought you said there was a contracting problem. A problem with the contract?
No, it was determined that there was no funding to extend, to renew the George Washington.
But
So
prior to
when
that, you
we-
said there, I thought, I'm pretty sure you said there was a problem with the contract.
No, I said the vendor providing the contract in our initial presentation at the last board meeting. There were questions about the vendor providing the contract, as well as they were in the C category, and we questioned whether there was going to be federal funding. When the department actually started looking into the funding issues, it was determined that George Washington was not eligible for any funding for a renewed contract.
Is this the
whether it
vendor
be-
you're speaking of?
There's no money to continue a contract with TNTP or with Amplify for George Washington School. It doesn't have, it's the school that can receive no more federal funding for contracted services. So it's the school that the federal guidelines that we must adhere to cannot receive any more federal funding. And to clarify that within the federal guidelines, and if there's anybody from the Department of Ed that can, if I'm speaking incorrectly, please come to the microphone. With a 3-year SIG grant, for instance, you can get a 3-year SIG grant of which George Washington had already received prior to you enacting them and giving them a lead partner. So they had exhausted the last year of their monies for that. And I have already contacted we've already contacted the U.S. Department because school improvement many times takes longer than the 3 years. But there's no extension process, there's no additional dollars that can be provided with either of the monies that, any of the monies that the school actually receives. They get their basic Title I dollars that are afforded to them as a Title I school, but there are no federal dollars for school improvement with this particular piece. The department exhausted all efforts to try to make sure that that could happen. If it could happen, it can't. And so I send information to the board about the non-renewal of George Washington. And it did include the TNTP. So we proceeded with having them do a scope of work for Broad Ripple, because that is a school that we could continue to support, as well as the other schools all had federal money dollars available to continue to support pieces. Yes, Sarah?
Given the funding issue, does the statute allow for the board to use alternate resources, state dollars, just to have, I thought there was something about flexibility in terms of funding these, so we're not just dropping off.
It does not for lead partners, is my understanding. It certainly does for a TSO, for the turnaround academies. You do have tuition dollars that are put in place for the state, but there are no state monies available to support school improvement lead partners. Are you aware of something I'm missing?
I was under the impression that that was within the statute, that the board had flexibility in providing funds from alternate state resources. Not necessarily the federal dollars, but from state dollars. That was my understanding.
Well, if
but I don't
there
know.
are any funds available that's supposed to happen, we're not aware of them from our level. We're not aware of any funding mechanisms. David?
Lead partner schools are turnaround academies, so I think the board has discretion to, if funds are available, to allocate them from other than federal sources. I want to go back to Broad Ripple if I could. I'm still confused about, at the last meeting we said roll over the work, have it continue as it was being done, understanding that some of the funding might come from IPS and some might come from the DOE.
Correct.
What I'm now hearing is that the scope of the work has been reduced.
We emphasize at least.
And I'm
It was
concerned
passed
about the
resolution.
reduction. I don't know how, I mean, first of all, the board said we ought to continue at the same level. But second, these people are doing good work in a school, and for them to be required to pull back leaves the school inadequately resourced against the mission for the third year. Question one is how'd that happen, and question two, what can we do about it?
Well, I think that it was prepared in joint, we prepared not only with TNTP, but IPS. And do you want Danielle to come forward and go ahead and talk about the contract updates at this point? Or do we want to listen to the rest of the presentations, or?
Can I just
Carrie?
say, like, my perception, I mean, I sit here and I type my notes, and they're my notes, and some of it would be gibberish to everybody else. But when I go home, like, this is what I look back over and I reflect on, and then I try to watch the video and try to compare. And so when I leave, this is my perception of what I feel like was decided upon. And my notes say that the board's recommendation is the new teacher project in Broad Ripple and George Washington will contract for 2013, 2014 based on overall success in previous years with IPS contract for same services district-wide. Amplify, discontinue interventions due to lack of growth and capable without interventions as done with Amplify. So my perception at least was that this was going to continue for George Washington.
And that is correct. And as I indicated in my emails to you regarding this topic, there was no funding for George Washington. There's no dollars available to continue a contract. So that was given
And
to
no
you in an
state
update.
dollars. Like,
There's a
We
budget.
have no state dollars at the Department of Education to put towards this at all.
and I'm
There are
not
no
disagreeing, you
dollars.
may have sent it to me, but, I mean, between doing this, you know, I mean, this is supposed to be a part-time job. I'm trying to be very diligent in doing it, you know, this is, you know, I have, and so, you know, when I get hundreds of pages of things, do I try to read them? Absolutely. Do I do the best to interpret them? I'm just telling you, when I left, my perception was it was continuing.
And I thought we said,
And it was my perception as well. And then I sent an update to you regarding George Washington has exhausted all funding resources. And so we were unable to continue those contracts. I sent those to you in August. And all I can say is I gave you an update from the perspective of having no funding for contract renewal with George Washington.
I did read that update, and I'm looking at it right now. I guess the part I wanted to clarify, the reason I didn't react to it when I got it and call you is because it says in here that we'll maintain the level of support that was given by the two partners at the same level of accountability and reporting to the SBOE, and it's implying that the department's going to assume that in light of the fact there's no funding for the lead partner.
Correct.
So my question is, if there's no state dollars to supplement the contract, what is the department going to use to ensure that that's a true statement that they're going to keep the intervention levels?
And we have a presentation for you on that with
Okay.
no problem. We'll have to use our existing resources we already have in place to provide those services. Perhaps Danielle, you want to come up and talk about contract, although I hate for our partners to stick around any longer than they need to.
Sure.
So what's the pleasure of the board? Do you want to talk about the contracts now, or do you want to talk about TNTP, have Scholastic and Voyager and Amplify do their presentations?
probably listen to the presentations. and-
Okay. Okay, Danielle, we'll wait just a moment.
Okay.
Thank you, TNTP. Thank you very much for being a great partner. Scholastic?
Thank you, Superintendent Ritz, members of the board. My name is Duncan Young. I lead our Scholastic Achievement Partners team. Scholastic Achievement Partners is the educator support and school improvement arm of Scholastic, and it's been our pleasure to work at Broad Ripple for the last 2 years, entering the third year of our partnership. So as I mentioned, we're moving into the third year of what we see as a great partnership with Broad Ripple and Scholastic Achievement Partners, as well as our colleagues at the New Teacher Project. We call this partnership Operation Rocket Fuel. Broad Ripple is the Rockets, and this was a term coined by one of the assistant principals at Broad Ripple to really communicate it to the staff and build momentum and buy-in around it back in the fall of 2011. The partnerships yielded, from our view, and I think as will be borne out by the data, really outstanding results, and we're excited to continue the momentum as we move into the coming year. As with the New Teacher Project, we began our work back in the fall of 2011 with a needs assessment, and we were very purposeful in taking a good 2 to 3 months up front to try to understand the school, understand the culture, and really involve the staff in helping to set the goals for school improvement. We had a broad outline. We wanted them to really help us refine that. What really came out of that needs assessment was evidence of the passion that teachers had for student achievement and for serving the students at Broad Ripple, and also that they felt like they had a lot of professional learning time allocated, but they didn't feel like it was being used in a purposeful way. So our main task was to really go in and try to take those structures already in place and help rethink how we were using that time in the most valuable way possible. I think when it comes to our goals, and I've got 5 goals listed up here, our project has been notable in terms of the focus of the goals. There's not 20 goals, there's only 5, and we've actually drilled down on some of those over the past couple of years. And also the consistency. The goals have really not changed from year to year. We've really tried to stay the course and be focused, and especially with staff turnover, keep a high level of consistency in the work that we're doing. So in year 1, we focused on 5 key areas. The first one and the real focal point of our work was improving classroom instruction. We identified 4 key strategies that we wanted every teacher implementing in every classroom every day, and then we realigned those professional learning structures, professional learning communities, job-embedded coaching, and we introduced an online professional learning component and aligned all of those around building teacher competency and knowledge around that focused set of strategies. We also implemented literacy interventions to support struggling learners. We implemented a blended learning intervention called Read 180, which has a significant amount of efficacy and research behind it, and we've seen great results with that. We also developed school-wide leadership capacity by working with the leadership team at Broad Ripple to form an instructional leadership team made up of 12 teacher leaders. That group has actually stayed constant and has served as both a conduit mechanism for feedback from the broader staff, as well as an oversight and an advisory board. And when we talk about gradual release and building capacity so that we, as a partner, could eventually step away and we're not going to see those gains slip, we see that instructional leadership team, or the ILT, as we call it, as being a key vehicle to realize that goal. And then we also focused on coordinating initiatives around school culture, community connections, and also in that first year did an analysis of the curriculum at the request of IDOE and made some recommendations for improvement. In year 2, you'll note that those goals were very, very consistent. We stayed the course with improving classroom instruction. Seeing some level of mastery on that initial 4 strategies, we introduced another layer of instructional strategies to broaden the toolkit that every teacher is bringing to their classroom instruction. We expanded the range of interventions that we offered as well. So we actually increased the number of students enrolled in that blended learning intervention program that I mentioned. And we also worked with an amazing team from Broad Ripple, and I'm excited to have Principal Mike Akers from Broad Ripple with us here today to actually reinvent success periods in the school. And this was really something led by Mike and his team. We worked in a supporting capacity. Success periods is additional time set aside for enrichment or remediation each and every day, and Mike and his team did a great job adding additional structure and rigor to that time that was being allocated. We continued our work with the ILT team as well as with school culture and community connections. This year, we're continuing that work on-site, working with teachers both in professional learning communities, online, and with the job-embedded coaching. We've actually expanded the interventions to include a math intervention. So I mentioned Read 180. We'll be implementing Math 180 as well this year for students in grades 6, 7, and 8 at Broad Ripple. And then from development of school-wide leadership capacity, we're really looking at this as being a critical year where we ask that ILT team to step up and to take on some of the responsibilities that we currently, as a partner, are taking on. Okay, so I know funding, obviously from the discussion today, has been a big issue, and we were asked to put together funding levels last year versus this year. And you can see it's gone down from about 1.1 million to about 560,000 this year. I want to make a couple of notes on this. First of all, this is actually a blend of a couple of different funding sources. So in both years, this represents, from my understanding, a blending of lead partner funds, but also school improvement grant funds for Broad Ripple. The other key point that I'd make is a big part of our philosophy is a gradual release model. So seeing a decline from year 2 to year 3 in terms of the amount of a contract and the level of resources would not be uncommon in the work that we do. I think the caution that I'm hearing around the board about moving too far too fast and making sure that we don't see backsliding on any of the good gains that has taken place, all incredibly important. I think something we've been very focused on in our conversations with the leadership team. I will say that the scope of work that corresponds to the amount on the right-hand side was something that we agreed on and scoped out with Mike and his team, really going back to the April and May timeframe, and felt like a good scope of work relative to the progress that had been made. And still, I would note, for a single school represents a significant amount of funding that we feel like is going to enable us to continue a lot of the good things that are happening this year. Yes, sir.
On that gradual, just on that, understanding how you're using that term with the gradual release, how do the metrics fit into that let you know where the triggers are that says, yes, we can release? I'm not hearing that. I'm listening for that, but I'm not hearing it. I understand the concept. I'm just not hearing what the metrics are and how you're seeing that to know when to say for sure.
That's a great question. So we've got key performance indicators identified for each of the areas of focus that I mentioned before. I'm going to go through some of that data in the next few minutes. So what I'd love to do is revisit that question. If I haven't answered it, would love to go back to it. We were also asked to put together just an alignment to school improvement plan. So the school improvement plan at Broad Ripple is their SIG, and so we listed the 4 major elements of the SIG and just showed how we correspond to our scope of work really corresponds in a very significant way to 3 of those 4 school improvement grant elements. And so what I'd love to do is revisit each of those areas of focus and talk about some of in a little more detail about the work that we do and some of the data that we gather. So here, improving classroom instruction, evidence of success. The thing we've really focused on, again, is defining what we call the Broad Ripple Way. And Mike has coined a term for his staff that's the Broad Ripple Way, every classroom, every day. So what is that focused set of high-impact strategies that really constitute a coherent and cohesive instructional vision that every teacher in the school can buy into? We then have aligned professional learning communities, an online learning initiative using a platform that is called Scholastic U that's currently in use by teachers at Broad Ripple, and job-embedded coaching where our coaches are going in shoulder to shoulder with a teacher in the classroom and helping them to implement those strategies that they've learned in the PLCs with fidelity. And then, of course, we'd monitored progress to ensure that instructional strategies were changing. So we monitor progress in a couple ways here. Like TNTP, we have a survey. It's called a WE survey, and it's really a measure of school climate and culture, but also the presence and absence of high-impact instructional strategies that are rigorous and relevant. So we really administer that survey. That's one method of progress monitoring. The other method that we use, and you see the data here, is for most of our instructional work, we create observation rubrics that actually try to identify and put some parameters around good implementation of some of the strategies that we are using in Broad Ripple. We actually created a rubric here centered around these broad areas of student engagement, reading comprehension, writing, and test-taking strategies. And what you see here is baseline data and then end-of-year data showing growth in aggregate teacher performance on a 4-point scale. And that shows baseline and end of year. We've just done our baseline for this year. So the answer, I think, to one of your questions around this big piece of work is if we see that kind of growth, and I believe we went into the last year wanting to see a 1-point increase, we largely saw that, and that was a good leading indicator to us that we could back off a little bit with the scope of work. So this year, stay focused and ensure ongoing classroom application. We got some feedback from teachers early last year that we were perhaps introducing too many strategies too quickly, and we were very keen to hear that. Mike had about a 20% turnover in his staff last year, and that was a great point in November where we course corrected, we pulled up, and we went back and revisited some of the key things that we had done in 2011 and 2012. This is a little more detailed, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through on the professional learning plan. What we've done, though, is our team, and we're in the process of doing it right now, we essentially calendarize a week-by-week view of exactly what teachers are going to be doing from a professional learning standpoint all the way through the year. So it gives an incredible amount of transparency and consistency to that work that our coaches do with teachers. The second key area of focus was successfully implementing a range of interventions, and the main area of focus here has been our implementation with high fidelity of the literacy intervention Read 180. Read 180 is a blended technology and teacher-led literacy intervention program that's in probably 3,000 districts around the country. And in year one, we administered a screener, Scholastic Reading Inventory, to identify students who would benefit from this intervention, typically students reading 2 to 3 or more grades below grade level. In year two, as I mentioned, we really focused on adding rigor to success periods. The focus this year is to really make sure that we've got a high degree of fidelity on all of those interventions. We know when implemented with fidelity, these interventions work, and so it comes down to making teachers comfortable and confident with the tools available to them in the classroom. So going back to the data, on the right-hand side here, one of the key things that we use is, again, that Scholastic Reading Inventory Lexile Progress Monitor. Lexiles, which I'm sure you're familiar with, are a very commonly used literacy metric around the country. And so here we actually, this is the cohort of Read 180 students, and it shows their pre-test scores at the beginning of the year going from about 725 all the way up to about 815 by the end of the year. So that's 1.2 grade levels of growth on average for that cohort of students. Many students far exceeded that pace of growth, which we were incredibly excited to see. School-wide leadership capacity, this is something where, quite honestly, it's probably the hardest to actually have a metric around it, but we rely a lot on our qualitative discussions with Mike and his staff. So again, I think the biggest thing we've done here is created that instructional leadership team. We've provided additional support for this group in developing instructional leadership skills. We hosted a 3-day leadership summit for that team last year that served as an incredible strategic planning period. That's where we got that feedback about the need to course correct and adjust some of our work on the ground. And as I mentioned, our focus this year is going to really be to make this team the focal point for some of the gradual release efforts that we're working on with the school. You can actually see already how the gradual release has scoped out. We started with 12 meetings in year one focused on building key knowledge of key instructional focus areas. We ramped that up to 28 meetings last year, and we actually had those ILT team members last year going in and co-leading professional learning community sessions with our coaches. And this year, we're going to take the next step of actually having them lead those PLCs independently with more oversight and monitoring from our team. So taking the next step in that gradual release process. So other initiatives, which I mentioned, improving school culture and community connections and analyzing the curriculum. School culture and community, we've worked closely with Mike in hosting a series of forums to raise awareness of this initiative in the community. We've met with the Broad Ripple Alumni Association and gotten their feedback. Anyone who's familiar with Broad Ripple knows that it's a very tight-knit community, that there's a tremendous amount of passion and pride in the community for the school, and we've really been excited to be a part of that. So I think perhaps the biggest piece of evidence is the ISTEP and ECA data, and I know we don't have ISTEP yet for this year, but pretty much across the board, with the exception of a small blip on ECA, ELA, we've been really excited with the results that we've seen. So looking at this data, what you should be seeing is significant jumps from 2010-11 to 2011-12. And then a maintenance of those gains in the last year. And even though we dipped a tiny amount in ECA, we looked at this and we were excited because what we see in a lot of cases is the implementation dip or the second year dip. So in year 2, year 3, if you get a big pop in year 1, sometimes sustaining that is the hardest thing. And the fact that we were largely able to sustain and continue to accelerate momentum, particularly in Algebra 1, we were excited about. Needless to say, we're going to be focusing closely on 10th grade ELA and making sure that we're doubling down and doing everything we can to keep that going in a positive direction this year. School letter grades, last year, the middle school went from an F to a C, the high school from an F to a B, and then some of the other indicators we were asked to report out on, all moving in the right direction. So increase in student attendance, small increase in staff attendance, and a fairly drastic decrease in the suspension rate, which I think is a testament to Mike and the leadership of his team at Broad Ripple. couple of great quotes here that we got from the staff, just talking about the power of the partnership. I think one of the things from our standpoint that was really important was that this is a partnership that has been achieved with the buy-in of the staff and with a high degree of alignment among all stakeholders. So, and by that I mean us, I mean TNTP, I mean IDOE, and I mean IPS. All of those entities, I can't remember a time in 2 years of partnership where we've had a major disagreement on an issue. It's been a very healthy partnership, and I think the alignment, especially when you have so many stakeholders coming to the table, is incredibly important. So it's been great to be a part of. Next steps, I think I've talked about some of these. So we really want to aim on getting this 2013-14 partnership off to a strong start. We're implementing the new professional learning plan and some of those new interventions that I mentioned, and we're looking forward to another great year at Broad Ripple. Be happy to take any questions. Sir?
Were you asked to present in August?
No, sir. I was attending the meeting and was present for it, but did not present.
Bravo, great
Okay,
presentation.
great. Thanks so much. Yes, sir.
First of all, thanks for presenting the student achievement data.
Sure, you're welcome.
That's really helpful. The process, infrastructure, activities that you're using are excellent, but that student achievement data really wows us, I think, or at least wows me. I'm intrigued by the notion of gradual release, and I'm concerned about beyond gradual release to the actual turning back of the school to the administration. And do you do anything in that last phase to be sure there's a transition, smooth transition back to that school? And is there any follow-up that you do, or should we be doing follow-up to ensure that the great strides that you've made continue?
So I would say yes on both of those points. So, you know, who knows what next year will hold. I would hope that we'd be able to continue in some have a successful year this year, and then continue in some capacity, even if it is in a follow-up capacity, to make sure that those key initiatives are continuing and being implemented with a high degree of fidelity. As I've listened to the infrastructure that Superintendent Ritz and the team have put together with the regional teams, I'm sure we're going to be working closely, and we've already had some great conversations with Teresa and her past few months as she's gone on board. I think we met with Teresa her second day on the job, if I'm not mistaken. So she probably did not want to see us, but she was kind enough to take the time and meet with us. So yes, I mean, there is, I would say this is more art than science in a lot of ways. There's no magic formula that's going to tell us how fast that we go. I think it's looking at some of the metrics that I laid out here, but then I think it's having a good collaborative discussion with everyone around the table and figuring out what the right level of oversight and the right pace of release is going to be. And I think a lot of that comes down to Mike, his leadership team being committed and strongly supportive of those initiatives going forward, which I think they absolutely are. And I think it means having a structure like that instructional leadership team so that, you know, leadership in a school doesn't exist in the form of a single individual. It actually is broad-based, and you have critical mass and critical mass of support around these initiatives. That's when you change the school culture, and that's when you're going to get a sustainable improvement in performance of the school.
We can finish that one more time. We have a number of these partners, and I think they're working really well for the most part. But we haven't really talked about that last component. How do we ensure that that school culture, that student achievement being the focus, continues? So whether it's DOE or somehow we become involved in a monitoring way, I think that's really critical. It's part of the assessment of whether or not this actually worked and took hold within that district. So I hope maybe at another meeting down the road that maybe DOE can come back and talk about how they're going to continue to monitor it, either with in partnership with some of our partners, or maybe DOE can do it on their own.
And I think that's part of outreach, and from the department's point of view, we greatly appreciate your commitment to making the parties, you know, work together to make things happen. So we look forward to working with you with outreach and getting Broad Ripple's already going where it needs to be going. So we're excited about that, and we're excited about your partnership, and I thank you very much for your presentation.
Likewise, we're looking forward to a great year. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Wager?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Judy Zimney. I'm a Vice President for Voyager Education Services, part of Voyager, part of the Cambium Learning Group. And thank you for your time this morning. And I know you've been here a long time, so I'll try to be both crisp but thorough. So please feel free to ask any questions if you have any, but at the same time, I want to be respectful of, you've probably got some rumbly tummies out here and those kinds of things. A broad overview, last year was Voyager's first year at John Marshall Community High School. It was the third year of their SIG grant. We provided over 700 on-site service days. One of the things that was important to us was that we provided a very integrated approach. We knew that there were strengths that were already provided by the district. There were strengths already within the school, strengths provided by the state. And what we saw our role as being is another piece, another strength to be added onto that, so that ideally, you know, there's a bigger source, a bigger pot of resources for the school when they added us onto them. To provide some context, one of John Marshall's challenge has been change. There were 3 vendors they worked with prior to us in the area of turnaround. Last year, they saw 2 new co-principals to the school. One of those co-principals had been an AP there for 3 years, but still a new structure. Staff retention had been a huge challenge. They had retained about 50%. Some years it might have been 47, some 53, but about 50% of the staff had been retained for each of the previous 3 years. So as we went into the 2012 school year, about half of the people were new to the school. What we also started with last year was really working hard to do a vertical approach. So while I was part of the team that really concentrated heavily on John Marshall, we had other groups that worked with the elementary schools that were the primary feeder schools into John Marshall Community High School. And when we look at graduation results, when we talk about what were our goals, to me our goals were very specific. They were graduation, they were I-STEP, they were ECA. Now there's a lot of strategies, there's a lot of interim goals and activities that you have to put in place to achieve those goals, but I'm going to talk very specific to those outcomes. We did see a significant decrease in the number of students who needed waivers for graduation, which was one of our areas of focus. The current graduation rate for the 2013 cohort students is currently about 73%, but the 76% from last year was up to that October 1 date, and so we still have a few students who are finishing credits, those kinds of things. So we'll probably only stay at about the same graduation rate as last year, but with a decrease in waivers. One of the things that was a real aha to us as we got more into the state data and began our work at John Marshall, and this year, it's just this year we know it sooner than we did last year, is that the graduation rate going into last school year was just slightly over 80%. Because as you know, through the DOE database and through Compass and those kinds of things, that students who are dropping out in those sophomore and junior years, that you don't start that when they're seniors. But that's where we were. When we went in last year, it was just only slightly above 80. So hopefully we can hang on to all those kids that we had when the school year started. The 2013 ECA algebra results, now you'll see quite a difference here from the data that Dr. Hinckley provided you earlier, and that's because what we looked at here, these are the 162-day students, the students who have the continuous enrollment, so they count for the report card purposes. So Algebra 10, the algebra passing rate was something we were extremely pleased with in contrast to the ELA, which we'll go look at next. So the scores increased from a 44% passing rate to a 56.7% passing rate in algebra for 10th graders. But when we looked at our English 10 results, an area that we had a lot more struggle with, it's basically about the same. Now, if I would go with Dr. Hinckley, her results were actually better. But the reality is when we look at the 162-day kids from 2012 to 2013, it is only about a 30% passing rate. One of the things the district has already supported and worked with us on to put in place this year is the acuity testing for English 10 for that English exam at that sophomore level, because one of our concerns last year was we didn't feel like we ever really had clean predictors to help guide us during the school year. It wasn't as fine-tuned as it needed to be. Another tool that we knew the department was interested when they began the contract with us last fall was the use of the quality review indicators established by Mass Insight. Prior to implementation in May 2012, 1 out of 9 of those indicators had been rated fair. The DOE did send a team to the school in December that did an observation, walkthroughs, those kinds of things, and at that point 5 out of 9 indicators were ranked as fair. When we look at the college and career ready indices, in May of 2012, the number that will actually count toward this year's report card, they didn't have any students that had actually achieved or earned 3 college credits. This year we do have 9% of our students in that 2013 cohort who have earned 3 college credits. If we look at operations overall, because operations became a huge issue for us, we started serious work in the school in September, just based on when our contract was done last fall. And one of the things we figured out really quickly was that the basic infrastructure within the school, how basic things were run, information, how it was disseminated, how things were calendared, how attendance was taken, a lot of very basic business type operations within the school needed a lot of support. You know, indirectly, how do you measure how well those things are working? One way is either it's a yes, no. They either are working or they're not to some degree. But we think some byproducts of the fact that operations are at least improved, they are not where they need to be, but they are improved, is that this year's staff retention was right at around 80%. So that really changed the context of our work going into this school year, having only 20% of the people be new to the building. One of the things that we established for the school administrators in the school was an electronic drop box with more than 100 customized templates using their test data, their students, their basically everything, you know, their goals, their discipline forms, because we wanted to build for them tools that they could continue to use into the future. That it wasn't on somebody's laptop, they didn't have to call somebody, it was there. Another thing that I thought was just interesting is one of the tools we worked with the principal on establishing was really maintaining a cohesive building-wide calendar that ran for the entire school year, and also providing weekly communication to the faculty in an organized way. And when we did our faculty staff survey at the beginning of this school year, just to get feedback, you know, anonymously on how often did you use these tools, about 80% of the faculty and staff said they read those things at least weekly. So it gives me indicators that make me believe operations are moving in the right direction. Another area that was part of the SIG for John Marshall was the whole idea of improving student self-management. Because when we look at all the issues around discipline, and they are still a serious concern at John Marshall, what you're really trying to do is teach students how to become better self-managers, more productive, more positive, more effective self-managers. And so one of the things we worked with the administrative team on was advising as appropriate, and in a very specific kind of way, what some of us might remember from our high school days, what was kind of called like an advisory period. As part of IPS, I think most of the schools have a success period built into their schedules when students receive some pretty tailored and specific tutoring or support, whatever they need academically. But one of the things that we realized very quickly was, well, students would get their report cards and, you know, shove them in bags and never look at them, let alone have any sense of how do I know how many credits I have and how does that work with my life? So around specific critical times, embedding scripted advisories into their schedules, including things like student goal setting and student data chats, so that information becomes meaningful to them and they own it. It's not always something outside of them. As we look at our work plan going into the next school year, like some of our other colleagues, a huge issue is how do you transition ownership for this work, for this thinking? Within my own little group, we had originally said, you know, we really need to figure out how to pass the baton. And then as we thought on it more, we said, no, it's not passing the baton. It's about how do you create the conditions so that people are grabbing the baton, because that's what you really want to have happen. Our current contract is for $620,000 and includes 263 service days. That's about half of what we had the previous year, just to give some perspective. We did collaborate with Dr. Hinckley she and I collaborated many times about what was the right amount of days, what were the right kinds of things to do, all of that. So it was a very collaborative decision where we ended up here. As we look at this upcoming school year, and I know that these goals are not really realistic. I mean, there's a part of me that knows that you don't go from a 30% passing rate to a 60. And yet there's another part of me, the part of me that used to be a high school principal, that says you gotta go for it. You have to say, what is it going to take to make this happen? So the theme that we really want to perpetuate at John Marshall this year is what I would call an 80-60-20. What do we do to make sure out of that little, just barely over 80% of kids that we currently now have to meet the 4-year graduation rate, how do we make sure that 80% do graduate on time this May? What do we need to do? What do we need to do to make sure that 60% of the kids do pass ISTEP and ECA? And when you look at ECA, you know, the algebra's not that far from it. So it's really like an all hands on deck around the English, and then I know we'll see ISTEP scores soon. And bumping up that college and career ready. But so to keep it in my head and to keep our goal something that people can carry around and not have to go check a poster to look at, I like to think of them as 80, 60, 20. What do I see as challenges, some of the challenges upcoming this year? While the high school attendance has actually improved, it improved slightly over 3 percentage points from the previous year, so that's a gain. The middle school attendance dropped about 2 points, a little less than 2 points. So that attendance definitely needs to improve. When you look at those suspensions, that obviously is a key part of the attendance issue. The suspensions are truly just indefensible. But I include them here because I think you have to include the hard data and the painful data as well as the happy data. The number of days students are out of school due to misconduct has got to be reduced dramatically. And when we look at our graduation rate right now, based on the DOE database, currently, if everything is perfect, it would be 82% because of students who have already officially dropped out of the cohort. What are the requirements? What is it going to take to make this happen? Time is a ticking. Time is a ticking. You know, we're already like in the 5th week of school.